Gilling. All members come 6 to 8 p.m. If not, $15 to $500 fine.
What? $250 fine by Karen?
The email notification lit up my phone at 6:47 in the morning. Another violation notice. Another fine. $250 for putting my trash can out 4 minutes early. 4 minutes. I stared at the timestamp on the attached photograph, my hands shaking with rage as I stood in my driveway in my bathrobe, looking at my trash can that I hadn't even touched yet. That's when I knew something was very, very wrong. And that's when I decided Karen Mitchell was going down. This is the story of how one woman's obsession with trash can placement times nearly destroyed an entire neighborhood, and how her own scheme became the trap that finally caught her. If you've ever dealt with an HOA tyrant who made your life a living hell over the smallest things, you're going to want to hear every single word of what happened next. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I need you to understand something first. What I'm about to tell you sounds absolutely insane. When I first tried explaining it to my wife, she thought I was losing my mind. When I told my coworkers, they laughed. But this really happened in an ordinary suburban neighborhood just outside Phoenix, Arizona, and it involved trash cans, surveillance footage, dozens of falsified violation reports, and one woman's complete mental breakdown over homeowner association rules that she herself was violating the entire time. My name is Derek Patterson, and I'm about as average as they come. I'm a 42-year-old insurance adjuster, married to my college sweetheart Julie for 16 years, father to 2 teenagers who barely acknowledge my existence unless they need money or a ride somewhere. We bought our 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in Maple Grove Estates back in 2018, drawn in by the community pool, the well-maintained common areas, and the promise of a quiet, peaceful neighborhood where people followed the rules and looked out for each other. For the first year, it was exactly that. Maple Grove Estates was the kind of place where neighbors waved to each other, where kids rode bikes in the cul-de-sacs until the streetlights came on, where the biggest drama was whose turn it was to bring snacks to the monthly book club. The HOA seemed reasonable. The dues were fair. The restrictions made sense. No one painted their house neon purple. No one left broken-down cars on blocks in their driveway. And everyone kept their lawns trimmed and their properties presentable. Then Karen Mitchell joined the HOA board in January of 2020, and everything changed. I first met Karen at a community meeting 3 months after she'd been elected to the board. She was a woman in her mid-50s with severely cut blonde hair that looked like she demanded to speak to her hairdresser's manager, designer athleisure, wear that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. She drove a white Mercedes SUV with a custom license plate that read RULS, and she had opinions about everything. She introduced herself to the community that night by presenting a 47-page revised edition of the HOA bylaws that she'd taken it upon herself to update. I should have known right, then we were in trouble. The revisions included new restrictions on everything from the acceptable shade ranges for exterior paint colors to the maximum height of decorative garden gnomes. But the section she seemed most passionate about, the section she spent 15 minutes explaining in excruciating detail, was the new trash and recycling container placement policy. According to Karen's new rules, trash containers could not be placed at the curb earlier than 6 p.m. on the evening before collection day, and had to be removed from visibility no later than 8 p.m. on collection day. Violation of this policy would result in a warning for the first offense, a $50 fine for the second, and escalating fines of up to $500 for repeat offenders. She explained, in a tone that suggested she was speaking to particularly slow children, that premature trash can placement was a blight on our community's aesthetic standards, and sent the wrong message about the kind of neighborhood we were cultivating. Most people in that meeting just nodded along, probably thinking the rules were overly specific, but harmless enough. I remember thinking she was a bit intense, but hey, some people take community standards seriously. I had no idea I was looking at someone who would spend the next year making my life absolutely miserable over garbage receptacles. The first email came on a Tuesday in March. Trash day in Maple Grove Estates was Wednesday morning, with trucks arriving between 7 and 9 a.m. I had put my trash can out at around 5:55 p.m. on Tuesday evening, right after I got home from work, which I thought was well within the 6 p.m. guideline. But at 7:30 that evening, my phone buzzed with an email from the Maple Grove Estates HOA with the subject line, "Violation Notice, 2847 Sycamore Drive." The email, signed by Karen Mitchell, HOA Compliance Officer, informed me that my trash receptacle had been observed at the curb at 5:47 p.m., 13 minutes prior to the acceptable placement time. This was my first offense, so I was receiving a written warning. Future violations would result in monetary fines. Attached was a photograph of my trash can, time-stamped 5:47 p.m., sitting at the curb of my driveway. I stared at that email for a solid 5 minutes. 13 minutes. I was being officially reprimanded by my homeowners association for putting my trash out 13 minutes early. My first instinct was to laugh it off, delete the email, and forget about it. But something bothered me. I distinctly remembered checking my watch when I wheeled the can down the driveway because I'd been conscious of the 6 p.m. rule. I was sure it had been 5:55, maybe 5:56 at the earliest. I went outside to bring the can back up to the garage, figuring I'd just wait until exactly 6 p.m. to put it back out. But when I got to the curb, I stopped cold. My trash can wasn't where I'd left it. I always positioned it with the handle facing the street so the truck's automated arm could grab it easily. But now the handle was facing my house. Someone had moved my trash can. Someone had taken my trash can, which I'd placed out at 5:55, and moved it to the curb earlier, then photographed it and reported me for a violation I didn't commit. I stood there in my driveway as the spring evening cooled around me, and a cold suspicion started forming in my gut. But I had no proof, just a moved trash can and a time-stamped photo. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I repositioned my trash can correctly, went inside, and decided to be more careful about timing in the future. That's what I should have done, anyway. What I actually did was pour myself a bourbon, pull up the HOA bylaws on my laptop, and spend 2 hours reading through every single ridiculous rule Karen had implemented, getting progressively angrier with each sip. Rising Action Phase 1. The campaign of harassment. The second violation notice came 3 weeks later. Same situation. I had been meticulous this time, waiting until my phone's clock displayed exactly 6:01 p.m. before wheeling my trash can to the curb. I'd even taken a photo of my watch next to the can as insurance. But the next morning, there was the email. Violation observed at 5:53 p.m. Second offense. $50 fine. And again, when I'd gone outside that evening, my trash can had been moved from where I'd placed it. I tried calling Karen directly. The phone number listed on the HOA website rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I left a polite message explaining that there must be some mistake that I had photographic evidence of when I'd actually placed my container out, and could we please meet to discuss this? She never called back. Instead, 3 days later, I received a formal letter via certified mail informing me that my fine had been processed and payment was due within 30 days, and that photographic evidence submitted by homeowners was not accepted as valid proof against violation documentation recorded by HOA compliance officers. I paid the $50. I'm not proud of it, but I had read enough horror stories about HOAs placing liens on homes over unpaid fines to know this wasn't a battle I could win by simply refusing. But I also started asking around the neighborhood, casually bringing up trash can policies at the community mailbox or when I ran into neighbors walking their dogs. That's when I discovered I wasn't alone. My next-door neighbor, Tom Hendricks, had received 3 violation notices in the past 2 months. The Ramirez family across the street had been fined $150 total. Old Mrs. Chen, 2 houses down, had gotten so fed up with the constant violation notices that she'd started keeping her trash in her garage until the morning of pickup, then setting her alarm for 6 a.m. to run it out before the trucks came, even though she was 78 years old and had arthritis in both knees. Every single person I talked to told the same story. They were certain they'd followed the rules, but the photographic evidence showed their cans out early, and several people mentioned the same detail I'd noticed. When they went to check after receiving the violation notice, their trash cans had been moved, repositioned, or turned differently than how they'd left them. But here's the thing. Nobody wanted to make waves. This was a nice neighborhood. Karen was on the HOA board. What were we going to do? Accuse a community leader of lying about trash can violations? It sounded insane even thinking it. So people grumbled, paid their fines, and tried to be more careful. I might have done the same thing if it had stopped there. But Karen was just getting started. In May, I received my third violation notice. $250. The email arrived while I was at work, time-stamped for a violation that allegedly occurred at 5:38 p.m., which was interesting, considering I was in a staff meeting 20 miles away at 5:38 p.m., and my trash can was still in my garage where it would remain until I got home at 6:15. That's when I knew, without any doubt, that something criminal was happening. Someone was accessing my property, moving my trash can to the curb, photographing it, then reporting me for a violation. And the only person who had any motivation to do that was Karen Mitchell. I called the police non-emergency line. The dispatcher was polite but ultimately unhelpful. Was anything stolen? No. Was there any property damage? No. Was there any direct threat? No. So basically, I had a civil dispute with my HOA about trash can placement times. They couldn't send an officer out for that. They suggested I handle it through the HOA's internal dispute resolution process or consult a lawyer. I consulted my lawyer friend Steve over beers that Friday night. Steve listened to the whole story, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. His professional opinion: I probably had a case for harassment and possibly for fraud if I could prove the violations were being fabricated. But fighting an HOA in court was expensive, time-consuming, and the outcome was never guaranteed. His advice was to install a security camera covering my driveway and trash can area, document everything, and build an ironclad case before taking any action. So that's exactly what I did. That weekend, I installed a ring camera with a clear view of my driveway and the curb where my trash can sat on collection days. I set it to record continuously and save all footage to the cloud. I started keeping a detailed log of exactly when I placed my trash can out, complete with timestamps and photos. And then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. The very next trash day, I placed my can out at exactly 6:02 p.m., verified by both my phone's timestamp and the security footage. I went inside, pulled up the camera's live feed on my laptop, and watched. At 6:17 p.m., a white Mercedes SUV pulled up to my curb. Karen Mitchell got out, looked around quickly to see if anyone was watching, walked over to my trash can, and wheeled it about 8 feet further down toward the street. Then she pulled out her phone, took several photographs, got back in her Mercedes, and drove away. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, my heart pounding. I had her. I had actual video evidence of HOA board member Karen Mitchell tampering with my property to create a false violation. I immediately downloaded the footage, backed it up in 3 separate locations, and sent a copy to Steve. The violation email arrived 40 minutes later. Observed at 5:51 p.m. Third offense. $250 fine. Steve's advice was to stay calm and keep collecting evidence. One incident wasn't enough, he said. We needed to establish a pattern of behavior. And more importantly, we needed to find out if she was doing this to other people too. If we could prove this was a widespread scheme, we had a much stronger case. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I created a private Facebook group called Maple Grove Estates Trash Talk and invited every neighbor I knew who'd complained about violation notices. I worded the invitation carefully, just saying it was a group to discuss HOA compliance issues and share strategies for avoiding violations. Within 3 days, I had 47 members. I started the first discussion thread by asking people to share their violation experiences and whether anyone had noticed anything unusual. The responses came flooding in. Tom Hendricks posted that he'd installed his own security camera after his 4th violation and had footage of someone in a white SUV moving his trash can. The Ramirez family said they'd seen someone messing with their cans on 2 separate occasions, but hadn't been able to get a clear look at who it was. Mrs. Chen shared that her grandson had been visiting once when a violation notice came through, and he'd been sitting on the porch the entire evening and swore he'd seen Karen Mitchell's car drive by multiple times. Over the next 2 weeks, we pieced together an absolutely damning picture. At least 15 households had similar stories. Several had partial video footage. The pattern was unmistakable. Karen would wait until early evening on trash day eve, drive through the neighborhood looking for cans that had already been placed out. And if she couldn't find any violations, she'd create them by moving cans from garages or side yards down to the curb early, then documenting and reporting them. But it got even worse. When we started comparing notes on the violation notices, we realized that households that pushed back or questioned the fines received more frequent violations. The Ramirez family had made the mistake of attending an HOA meeting to contest their second fine. In the 3 months since that meeting, they'd received 8 more violations. Tom Hendricks had sent a certified letter requesting an in-person hearing. His violations had doubled. This wasn't just about enforcing HOA rules. This was targeted harassment, and it was generating thousands of dollars in fine revenue. That's when someone in the Facebook group asked the question that should have been obvious from the start. Where was all that fine money going? I volunteered to find out. As an HOA member in good standing, I had the right to request financial records. I submitted a formal written request to the HOA board for all financial statements from the past 18 months, specifically itemizing revenue from compliance violations. The response came from Karen herself, a terse email stating that financial records were available for review by appointment only, and the next available appointment was in 6 weeks. I booked it immediately and prepared to wait. But I also reached out to another board member, a reasonable guy named Dan Peterson, who'd been on the board since before Karen's reign of terror began. Dan and I met for coffee on a Saturday morning. I laid out everything we'd discovered, showed him some of the video evidence, and explained the pattern we'd uncovered. I watched his face go from skeptical to concerned to absolutely horrified as the reality sank in. I had no idea, he kept saying. She handles all the compliance documentation herself. She told us she was just being thorough, that we had a serious problem with people ignoring the container placement rules. The fine revenue goes into the general operating fund. I never thought to question where it was coming from. Dan promised to look into it from his position on the board. 3 days later, he called me back. His voice was shaking. In the 15 months since Karen had taken over compliance enforcement, the HOA had collected over $47,000 in trash-related violation fines. In the 3 years before that, total fines for all violations combined had been less than $2,000 annually. The Facebook group exploded when I shared Dan's findings. $47,000 from trash cans. People were furious, but they were also scared. Karen Mitchell wasn't just some overzealous HOA volunteer. She was running what amounted to an extortion scheme, and she had the full authority of the Homeowners Association behind her. Several people wanted to go public immediately, call the local news, post everything on social media. But Steve strongly advised against it. We needed to be strategic. If we went public too soon, Karen could claim she was being defamed, could potentially sue for damages, and could use her position on the HOA board to make life even more difficult for everyone involved. We needed to handle this through proper channels first. Dan agreed to call for an emergency HOA board meeting to address the violation fine issue. As a board member, he had that right. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening 2 weeks away. In the meantime, Steve helped me prepare a formal presentation documenting the entire scheme, complete with video evidence, testimonials from affected homeowners, and a financial analysis showing the massive spike in fine revenue. But we also needed to catch Karen in the act one more time, on video, in a way that left absolutely no room for doubt or alternative explanations. So the Maple Grove Estates Trash Talk Facebook group hatched a plan. We coordinated a sting operation for the trash day right before the emergency board meeting. 15 households agreed to participate. Each household installed or borrowed a security camera with a clear view of their trash can area. Each household placed their trash can out at the proper time, exactly at or after 6 p.m., and documented it with time-stamped photos and video. And then we waited. I watched my own security feed like a hawk that evening, my laptop open on the kitchen counter. Julie thought I was losing my mind, obsessing over garbage cans like this. But even she had to admit the evidence we'd collected was disturbing. Our kids thought the whole thing was hilarious. My daughter posted, My dad is in a gang war with the HOA over trash cans on her TikTok and got like 3,000 likes. At 6:23 p.m., Karen's white Mercedes appeared on my street. I immediately texted the group. She's here. I watched on my camera as she drove slowly past my house, past the Ramirez place, continuing down Sycamore Drive. My phone started buzzing with incoming texts. Tom saw her on his camera. Mrs. Chen's grandson spotted her from the front window. The Johnsons 3 streets over reported her turning onto their block. For the next hour and 17 minutes, Karen Mitchell drove through Maple Grove Estates on what appeared to be a systematic route, stopping at houses whose trash cans were accessible. We tracked her progress through the neighborhood via our security cameras and eyewitness reports. It was like watching a crime spree in real time, except the crime was moving people's garbage bins. She hit 11 houses that night. We had clear video footage of her at 7 of them, either moving cans from garages to curbs, repositioning cans that were already out to make them appear they'd been placed earlier, or in 2 cases, actually wheeling cans from side yards where they'd been properly stored and placing them at the curb. At each location, she photographed the cans with her phone, then quickly left. The violation emails started arriving around 8 p.m. All 11 households received them. All were timestamped for violations allegedly occurring between 5:35 and 5:58 p.m., and every single one of them was provably false, documented by our security footage showing the actual placement times. We had her dead to rights. Multiple counts of trespassing, property tampering, fraud, and falsification of official HOA documents. Steve compiled everything into a comprehensive evidence package. It was 43 pages long, with links to over 6 hours of video footage. The night before the emergency board meeting, I barely slept. This was it. After months of harassment, hundreds of dollars in undeserved fines, and countless hours of investigation, we were finally going to expose Karen Mitchell for exactly what she was. I had no idea how spectacularly it was about to blow up. The emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the Maple Grove Estates Community Clubhouse. Normally, these meetings drew maybe 15 or 20 residents, mostly retirees with nothing better to do. That Tuesday night, over 130 people showed up. Every seat was filled. People lined the walls. Some folks had to stand outside and watch through the windows. Karen arrived at 6:55, her usual 5 minutes early, carrying her leather-bound planner and a coffee from Starbucks. I watched her face as she walked into the clubhouse and saw the crowd. Her expression flickered through confusion, concern, and then settled into a tight, controlled smile. She knew something was wrong, but she was going to brazen it out. The board sat at a folding table at the front of the room. Dan Peterson, Karen Mitchell, Treasurer Robert Yang, and Secretary Diane Foster. Dan called the meeting to order and explained that they'd received serious concerns regarding HOA violation enforcement practices and fine assessment procedures. Karen immediately tried to take control of the meeting. She stood up and launched into a prepared speech about the importance of community standards, how violation enforcement was necessary to maintain property values, and how a small group of disgruntled homeowners who didn't want to follow the rules were attempting to undermine the board's authority. Dan let her talk for about 2 minutes, then politely asked her to sit down. He invited me to present our findings. I walked to the front of the room with my laptop and the printed evidence package. My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed steady. I started with the basics. I explained the trash can placement policy and the fine structure. I showed the timeline of violation notices and the spike in fine revenue. I presented testimonials from over 30 households describing identical experiences, following the rules but receiving violation notices anyway. Trash cans mysteriously moved or repositioned, increasing harassment for anyone who questioned the fines. Then I played the videos. On a projector screen set up at the front of the room, the entire community watched Karen Mitchell systematically tampering with people's property, creating false violations, documenting them, and driving away. The room was absolutely silent except for the audio from the security footage. You could have heard a pin drop. I played 7 different video clips from 7 different households over 3 different trash days. Each one showed the same thing. Karen's white Mercedes. Karen getting out. Karen moving trash cans. Karen taking photographs. The timestamps on the videos clearly showing the proper placement times, compared to the violation notice timestamps claiming early placement. When the final video ended, I looked directly at Karen. Her face had gone completely white. Her carefully maintained composure was cracking. Her hands gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were bone white. "These are fabricated," she said, her voice shaking. "This is a coordinated attack on my character. Those videos are edited. The timestamps are fake. This is a conspiracy by people who want to violate community standards without consequences." That's when Tom Hendricks stood up. He was a big guy, former college football player, with a voice that carried. "I have the original files from my security system," he said, "with metadata showing exact date, time, and location. I'd be happy to provide them to any independent expert for verification." Then Mrs. Chen stood up. "I have videos too, and my grandson witnessed you moving my cans with his own eyes. Then the Ramirez family. Then the Johnsons. Then person after person after person, all standing, all confirming they had evidence, all ready to testify to what they'd witnessed." Karen looked around the room at the sea of standing neighbors, and something in her just snapped. She lunged across the table, pointing her finger at me like a weapon. "You put them up to this," she screamed. "You coordinated this whole thing to undermine me because you don't want to follow the rules. You're the problem. You and your trash talk group and your fake videos and your lies." The room erupted. People shouting questions at Karen, the other board members trying to restore order, someone's phone ringing loudly with a mariachi ringtone. In the chaos, Dan was banging a gavel he'd apparently brought specifically for this purpose, and Robert Yang was frantically typing on his laptop, probably already drafting Karen's removal from the board. It took 10 minutes to get everyone quiet again. When order was finally restored, Dan addressed Karen directly. "Karen, these are serious allegations with substantial evidence. Before this board takes any official action, do you have any explanation for what we've just seen?" Karen's face cycled through about 6 different expressions in as many seconds. Denial, anger, defiance, fear, calculation. I could practically see her mind working, trying to find an angle, a justification, a way to spin this in her favor. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed completely. Gone was the authoritative HOA compliance officer. What emerged was something desperate and slightly unhinged. "You don't understand," she said, and to my complete shock, tears started running down her face. "I was trying to help. This neighborhood was falling apart. People were getting lazy, complacent. Standards were slipping. Someone needed to enforce the rules to maintain order. Yes, I moved some trash cans. Yes, I documented violations that were technically outside the specified timeframe. But I did it for the good of the community. Property values depend on maintaining standards. If we let people get away with small violations, it creates a culture of disrespect for all the rules." The room stayed silent, but it wasn't a sympathetic silence. It was the silence of people watching someone dig their own grave deeper with every word. "And the money?" Dan asked quietly. $47,000 in fines over 15 months. Where exactly was that money going? "Into the general fund," Karen insisted. "Every penny went into the HOA operating account. I didn't keep it. I wasn't stealing. I was generating revenue for community improvements, the new landscaping at the entrance, the resurfacing of the tennis courts. That was all paid for with enforcement fine revenue. You're welcome, by the way. None of you seem to have a problem with the improvements when you were using them." Robert Yang cleared his throat. "I hate to contradict you, Karen, but as treasurer, I can confirm that the entrance landscaping was paid for by a special assessment voted on by the community, and the tennis court resurfacing was funded by a 5-year reserve allocation. The fine revenue has been sitting in the operating account largely unused." Karen's face flushed red. "Then it's there for future projects, for emergencies, for whatever the community needs. The point is I was doing my job. I was enforcing the rules that all of you agreed to when you bought your homes here. And now you're attacking me for it because you don't like being held accountable." That's when Steve, my lawyer friend who I'd invited to observe, stood up. He introduced himself, established his credentials, and then addressed the board directly. "For the record, what Mrs. Mitchell has described and admitted to constitutes multiple violations of Arizona state law: trespassing on private property, tampering with personal property, fraud in the creation of false documentation, and potentially harassment. The HOA should be aware that several affected homeowners are considering both civil and criminal complaints. The color drained from Karen's face again. I never trespassed. I was acting in my official capacity as an HOA compliance officer. I had authority to access common areas and enforce violations. Residential driveways and garages are not common areas, Steve replied calmly. And no HOA authority supersedes state property laws. You accessed private property without permission, moved personal property without authorization, and created false documentation to assess financial penalties. That's fraud, clear and simple. Karen looked around the table at her fellow board members, panic finally showing through. Dan, Robert, Diane, you're going to let him threaten me like this? We're supposed to be on the same team. Tell them I was just doing what we all agreed needed to be done. Dan shook his head slowly. Karen, you never told us you were moving people's trash cans. You never told us you were creating violations. You presented us with documentation that we believed was accurate. If we'd known you were fabricating evidence, we never would have approved those fines. Diane Foster, who'd been silent until now, spoke up in a quiet, sad voice. I was starting to wonder why so many violation notices were coming through. It seemed like every week there were more and more. But you said people were just getting worse about following the rules. You said we needed to be stricter. I trusted you. You should have trusted me. Karen's voice was rising again, taking on a hysterical edge. I was the only one willing to do the hard work. The rest of you just wanted to sit back and let the neighborhood go to hell while you pretended everything was fine. Someone needed to take action. Someone needed to care about standards and rules and order. And that someone was me. I sacrificed my time, my energy, driving around this neighborhood night after night documenting violations while all of you did nothing. And this is the thanks I get. You were creating the violations you were documenting, I said, speaking up for the first time since my presentation. You weren't finding rule breakers. You were making them. You were literally manufacturing problems so you could be the one to solve them. Do you understand how crazy that is? Karen's eyes locked onto mine with pure hatred. You, she hissed. This is all because of you. You and your little investigation, your little Facebook group, your little conspiracy. You couldn't just follow the simple rule of putting your trash out at the right time. You had to make it into some kind of crusade. You turned the whole neighborhood against me. No, Karen, I said, keeping my voice level. You did that yourself. Every fake violation notice. Every fabricated fine. Every time you moved someone's trash can and lied about it. You turned the neighborhood against you by harassing innocent people and stealing their money through fraud. She stood up so fast her chair fell over backward. I didn't steal anything. Every fine was processed through official channels. The money went into the HOA account. I didn't keep a penny. But you assessed fines based on violations you created, Steve interjected. The fact that you didn't personally pocket the money doesn't make it any less fraudulent. You used your position of authority to extract money from homeowners through false pretenses. That's theft by deception. The emergency board meeting lasted another 2 hours. By the end of it, the board had voted unanimously to immediately suspend Karen Mitchell from all HOA duties pending a full investigation. They also voted to refund every trash-related violation fine assessed in the past 15 months, totaling $47,360. Robert Yang, the treasurer, suggested they also refund an additional 10% as a gesture of apology for the stress and inconvenience, bringing the total to just over $52,000. The board also voted to hire an independent law firm to conduct a complete audit of all HOA violation enforcement practices and to review every fine assessed during Karen's tenure for potential irregularities. Dan volunteered to personally contact every household that had received a violation notice to inform them of the refund process and apologize on behalf of the board. As for Karen herself, she sat in silence through all the votes, her face blank, looking at nothing. When Dan asked if she had anything else to say, she just shook her head. She gathered her planner, her phone, and her Starbucks cup and walked out of the clubhouse. She didn't look at anyone, didn't say goodbye, just left. The room erupted in conversation the moment the door closed behind her. People were crying, hugging, high-fiving. Mrs. Chen came over and squeezed my hand so hard I thought she might break something. Tom Hendricks clapped me on the shoulder with enough force to make me stumble. My phone was buzzing non-stop with messages from the Trash Talk Facebook group celebrating the victory. But the legal resolution didn't end that night. Over the next week, Steve helped me file a formal complaint with the Arizona Attorney General's office detailing the fraud scheme. The AG's office opened an investigation. The local police department, suddenly much more interested now that there was clear evidence of systematic fraud, assigned a detective to review the case. 3 weeks later, Karen Mitchell was formally charged with 15 counts of fraud, 22 counts of criminal trespassing, and 8 counts of theft by deception. The Maricopa County prosecutor who handled the case told me it was one of the strangest cases she'd seen, but also one of the clearest. The evidence was overwhelming. The video footage was damning. And Karen's own admission during the board meeting, which had been recorded by at least a dozen people on their phones, sealed her fate. She tried to fight it at first, hired a lawyer who attempted to argue that she'd been acting in her official capacity and had immunity for actions taken in good faith as an HOA officer. But that defense collapsed pretty quickly when the prosecutor pointed out that creating false evidence was by definition not acting in good faith. In the end, Karen took a plea deal. She pled guilty to 5 counts of fraud and 3 counts of trespassing. The judge sentenced her to 200 hours of community service, 3 years probation, and ordered her to pay restitution to every homeowner she'd fraudulently fined. She was also permanently banned from serving on any homeowner association board in Arizona. The community service part was particularly satisfying. The judge, who apparently had a sense of poetic justice, assigned Karen to work with the city's sanitation department. For 200 hours, Karen Mitchell spent her weekends helping collect trash, clean up illegal dump sites, and maintain public waste facilities. Every Saturday and Sunday for 6 months, we'd see her in an orange safety vest, working alongside city employees, picking up garbage. But beyond the legal outcomes, there were personal victories that mattered even more. The HOA completely overhauled its bylaws and enforcement procedures. The ridiculous trash can placement policy was modified to a much more reasonable standard. Cans could be out anytime the evening before collection and needed to be retrieved within 24 hours after. No more 6 p.m. deadline. No more measuring violations in minutes. The board also implemented new oversight procedures requiring all violation notices to be reviewed by at least 2 board members before being sent, and requiring photographic evidence to include multiple angles and clear timestamps from an official source, not just a personal phone. They created an appeals process that was actually fair and accessible, and they capped violation fines at reasonable amounts that reflected actual harm to the community rather than being punitive revenue generators. Dan Peterson was elected as the new HOA president in the next regular election. One of his first acts was to establish a community relations committee to address concerns and conflicts before they escalated to violations. He also organized a neighborhood barbecue where he publicly apologized again for the board's failure to catch Karen's scheme earlier. The Trash Talk Facebook group, which had started as a secret investigation coordination tool, evolved into a genuine community forum. We still use it to discuss HOA issues, but also to organize block parties, coordinate neighborhood watch, share recommendations for plumbers and electricians, and post pictures of lost pets. It became a real community resource. As for the individual homeowners who'd been targeted, the vindication meant everything. Mrs. Chen cried when she received her refund check. She'd been living on a fixed income, and the fines had been a real financial hardship. Tom Hendricks framed his refund check before cashing it, hung it in his garage as a trophy. The Ramirez family used their refund money to throw a block party, inviting everyone who'd been part of exposing Karen's scheme. My own refund was $300, covering the fines I'd paid plus the additional 10%. Julie insisted we donate it to a local charity that helped seniors with home maintenance, in honor of Mrs. Chen and other elderly homeowners who'd been victimized by Karen's scheme. It felt like the right way to close that chapter. The whole experience changed how I thought about community and standing up for what's right. Before this, I was the kind of person who avoided conflict, paid whatever fines came my way, and tried not to make waves. But watching how a single person with a small amount of unchecked authority could abuse an entire neighborhood taught me that sometimes you have to make waves. Sometimes you have to investigate, organize, gather evidence, and fight back against injustice, even when the injustice is about something as seemingly trivial as trash cans. It's been 18 months since that emergency board meeting. Maple Grove Estates is quiet again, but it's a different kind of quiet. It's the peaceful quiet of a community that functions properly, not the tense quiet of people walking on eggshells afraid of the next violation notice. I still see Karen occasionally. She still lives in the neighborhood. After her community service ended, she basically became a hermit. She doesn't come to HOA meetings, doesn't participate in neighborhood events. I'll see her sometimes pulling into her driveway and she won't make eye contact, just parks in her garage and closes the door. Part of me feels bad for her. I genuinely think she started with good intentions, wanting to maintain community standards, and somewhere along the way it twisted into an obsession and then into outright fraud. But mostly, I feel relieved that she's no longer in a position of power over anyone. The new HOA board is boring in the best possible way. They maintain the common areas, organize a few community events, send out occasional reminders about actual important issues like fire safety and water conservation. Violation notices are rare, and when they do come, they're for legitimate issues like someone leaving a boat parked on the street for 3 weeks or a real safety hazard. My trash can now goes out whenever I feel like putting it out on Tuesday evening and comes back in whenever I get around to it on Wednesday. Usually that's within the guidelines. Sometimes it's not. Nobody cares. That's how it should be. The Trash Talk Facebook group is still active. Last week someone posted a meme about Karen with a trash can and we all had a good laugh. But mostly, we use it for actually useful neighborhood stuff now. Just yesterday, someone posted asking for recommendations for a good tree trimming service, and within an hour, they had a dozen helpful responses. My kids still think the whole thing is hilarious. My daughter's TikTok about the trash can wars ended up going viral, got like 500,000 views. She keeps threatening to make a documentary about it for her film class. I've told her absolutely not, but I'm not sure she's listening. Julie says I'm a neighborhood hero, though she says it with a mix of pride and amusement, like she can't quite believe her boring insurance adjuster husband led her investigation to take down a corrupt HOA board member. Honestly, I can't quite believe it either. The whole experience taught me that normal people have more power than they think they do. When faced with injustice, even small-scale suburban HOA injustice, you don't have to just accept it. You can investigate. You can organize. You can gather evidence. You can stand up and fight back through proper channels. And sometimes, if you're persistent enough and the evidence is clear enough, justice actually prevails. Also, it taught me never to underestimate how crazy someone can get about trash cans. But that's a different lesson. These days, every Tuesday evening when I wheel my trash can down to the curb, I think about that night when I first realized my can had been moved, when that cold suspicion first formed. I think about all the hours spent reviewing security footage, coordinating with neighbors, building the case piece by piece. And I think about the look on Karen's face when those videos played in front of the entire community and her whole scheme came crashing down. Then I position my trash can with the handle facing the street, walk back up my driveway, and go inside to have dinner with my family, in my home, in my peaceful neighborhood, where trash day is once again the most boring day of the week. Exactly as it should be. If you're dealing with an HOA situation that seems unfair, unjust, or outright fraudulent, I want you to know that you're not powerless. Document everything. Save every email, every notice, every piece of communication. Install security cameras if you can afford them. Take time-stamped photos and videos. Keep meticulous records. Talk to your neighbors. You might think you're the only one being targeted, but chances are others are experiencing the same thing. There's power in numbers. Organize, share information, support each other. Know your rights. Read your HOA bylaws carefully. Understand what authority the board actually has and what restrictions exist on that authority. Consult with a lawyer if you need to. Many lawyers will do a free initial consultation, and some specialize specifically in HOA disputes. Use proper channels first. Try to resolve issues through official processes, appeals, board meetings. Document that you attempted resolution through appropriate means. It strengthens your case if things escalate, but also know when to escalate. If you have clear evidence of fraud, harassment, or illegal activity, don't be afraid to involve law enforcement, regulatory agencies, or the court system. HOA boards are not above the law, no matter how much some of them act like they are. And finally, get involved in your HOA. Attend meetings. Vote in elections. Run for the board if you have the time and energy. The best way to prevent someone like Karen from abusing power is to ensure the board is filled with reasonable people who see their role as serving the community, not ruling over it. The HOA system isn't inherently bad. When it works properly, it can maintain property values, provide nice amenities, and create genuine community. But like any system, it's only as good as the people running it. So be one of the good people. Hold the board accountable. Demand transparency. Insist on fairness. Your home is probably your biggest investment. Your neighborhood is where you live your daily life. You deserve better than to be harassed, extorted, or abused by petty tyrants with a little bit of authority. Stand up for yourself. Stand up for your neighbors. And never, ever underestimate the importance of documenting everything, even if it seems to be about something as ridiculous as trash cans. Because sometimes the trash really does take itself out. You just have to make sure there's a camera recording when it happens.